Hello and welcome to Manika IAS. In this video, we'll be discussing about the fundamental rights, which is one of the most important topic when it comes to UPSC or any other state entrance exam. Okay. And apart from the knowledge with respect to exam, I feel every individual who is a, a part of this country, who is a citizen of country, should know about the bare minimum fundamental rights that the constitution has provided them. Alright, so it is something that you should also spread awareness about. So, but you should also know it before. So, we'll discuss about the fundamental rights, the most important topic of UPSC. Okay, so before entering into the definitions and the description of the fundamental rights, like the type of rights that we have, what does the term fundamental right imply? See, rights means any sort of entitlement. Any sort of entitlement. Now, how do you say that certain rights are fundamental whereas certain are not fundamental? What does the term fundamental implies if rights? So, fundamental right implies the entitlements that you have by the virtue of your birth. Just because you were born in India, since we are discussing about India, you should have certain rights that are your basic needs, that are your fundamentals. Why? Because every individual which is born with a sort of talent, a sort of potential, and in order to achieve that potential to the fullest, okay, you need to have certain facilitating platform, and these rights act as those platform. These are the basic fundamental rights that you should have. Okay, that is why these are called fundamental rights, and to achieve full potential. And this is the reason it is also known as cornerstone or Magna Carta. Okay, now from where did we get our fundamental rights? See, fundamental rights first came in US Constitution, and they added by the means of first to 10 amendment. And this was called Bill of Rights. Indian Constitution took inspiration and added part 3 as fundamental rights, article 12 to 35 under part 3. Okay, so before entering into the details with respect to what are the fundamental rights and everything, one thing that you must know is what are the different type of rights that we have, because this is one area where students can get a lot of confusion, and they generally give wrong answer surrounding this area. So if you have clear understanding of which rights are called what, you can do a good justice to your exam. Okay, so all the rights, since their source of origin is a law, they are legal rights. Okay, so the law give origin to certain rights, and that is why all the rights in the country are known as legal rights. Now, legal rights are now divided into two types. One are constitutional rights, one are extra constitutional rights or other legal rights, or statutory rights. Statutory rights. Okay, so constitutional rights are the rights which are mentioned in the book, which is your Constitution of India. Any right which is mentioned in the provision of this particular book, which is your Constitution of India, is a constitutional right, and every other right from outside this book is your extra constitutional or other legal rights. So the rights which are mentioned in the Constitution of India are your constitutional rights, and the rights outside the Constitution of India coming from any other statute is your statutory right, extra constitutional right, or your other legal rights. Okay, say for example, if you see your Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which is your MGNREGA, it guarantee you 100 days of work subject to many conditions. Okay, so now this right to work is your right from a law which is outside the constitution. That is why this comes under the ambit of extra constitutional right. Similarly, your maternity act allows for 6 month paid leave. Okay, now that is also your right under that particular act. Okay, that is also your extra constitutional right. Similarly, you have certain consumer rights and so on, the list goes on. So all these rights are your extra constitutional rights. Coming to your constitutional rights are also two types. One are your fundamental rights, other are your other constitutional rights. Now fundamental rights means the rights that we'll be discussing in this particular lecture series, that is right under part 3 between article 12 to 35. The rights mentioned in this particular part in these articles are your fundamental rights, and any other right outside this provision but in the Constitution of India are your other constitutional rights. Say for example, your 300A provides for right to property, your 326 provides for right to vote. Similarly, you also have right to universal franchise under article 325. You have right to freedom of movement, trade, that is also there. So these are your other constitutional rights, and then your fundamental rights. But what is the distinction between the two? What is the privilege of being there? Why there were certain rights which were kept there? One, we have discussed the reason. Lekin what is the privilege that they have? The privilege is in case of violation of fundamental rights, you can directly approach the Supreme Court under Article 32, which is also your fundamental right. So in case your fundamental rights is being taken away, you can go to Supreme Court. This is your first. In case these rights are taken away, you cannot directly go to the Supreme Court. However, you can go to the High Court. Okay, so this is the distinction between the two. The other distinction is these rights cannot be taken away until and unless there is an emergency sort of situation which you cannot help with. Then these rights are at stake, and that we'll discuss when we'll discuss about the national emergency chapter. In this we'll discuss when these rights can be taken away, but these rights are generally cannot be taken away. So they are more sacrosanct, and that's why we said they are the Magna Carta. Okay? So this is the distinction, and to put it more clearly, all rights fall under the ambit of legal rights. Then in legal rights you have extra constitutional rights and constitutional rights. In constitutional rights you have fundamental rights and other constitutional rights. So in simple terms, all fundamental rights are your constitutional rights. However, all constitutional rights are not your fundamental rights. Okay, so if you remember this diagram, there are less chances and minimal chances of you to commit a mistake in your exam. So you remember this, learn few examples, and you will be able to perform well. Now let us discuss the features of fundamental rights. See, these are the 4 core features of fundamental rights. There are many other that we'll discuss when we'll discuss about the fundamental rights. But these are the 4 core features of fundamental rights. The first and foremost is it is a qualified right. Now what does the term qualified implies? Qualified means it is not an absolute right. Now that's again a term. Okay, so not absolute means it can be subjected to certain restriction. However, the catch is those restriction has to be reasonable. You cannot just impose a restriction on fundamental right like this and then you say, okay, it is subject to this restriction. No, it has to be reasonable. Say for example, Constitution mentions certain restrictions as in sovereignty of the nation, public order, Then you have morality, health, foreign relations, etc. Now these are certain restrictions which are mentioned in the constitution. Why do we say that? That what is the need of subjecting them to a certain restriction? See, what happens is, you must have read or seen in the news that whenever there is a riot sort of a situation which goes out of hand, government tend to impose curfew, and during that even the internet is being banned there. And then if somebody comes up and say, no, it's my freedom of right to speech and expression, how can you ban the internet? I can speak, I want to know. Okay, but the thing is, the primary importance for a country is to safeguard the essence of a country, safeguard the territory, safeguard the sovereignty of a country. Okay, so you need to have stability. You do not want any sort of messages or anything, information which is being passed which encourage these activities. So the primary importance, the primary agenda is to have stability, and then only you can enjoy. If it is unstable, what is the point of you even knowing and not enjoying those rights? Okay, you can enjoy the rights only when there is a stability. Okay, so that is why these are reasonable restrictions. Okay, then the second thing is they are enforceable. What does the term enforceable means? Enforceable means most of the laws can are do not need most of the fundamental rights do not need a law to be enforced. Say for example, if the constitution mentions that right to life, you have it. Just because it is written, you have it. You do not need a law for it to be there. Okay, the parliament is not going to sit down and then make a law on right to life and then it will be given to you. No, since it is mentioned in the constitution, right to life, you have it. Similarly, you have right to freedom of speech and expression, you have it. Okay, it doesn't require a law. However, there are certain provision, there are certain fundamental rights which needs a law. That is why we are saying that they are mostly directly enforceable. Okay, and what are those? Say for example, article 17, abolition of untouchability, we have an act. Then right to education also, article 21A, we do have an act for that. So these are certain provision which are there, which needs a law. And on those provision also, only parliament can frame laws. State legislature cannot frame laws. Why? Because we want uniformity across the country. Okay, because if one state is framing a law on that provision, it will applicable only in that state, not on all other states. So if every state is being allowed to frame a law on as per their wish, so there will be a non-uniformity. That is why only parliament can make law which will be uniformly applicable to all the states. Okay. Second, all these laws are largely enforceable only against state. Okay, that means you can ask your fundamental rights from state only. You cannot ask your fundamental rights from private organizations or maybe from your what do we call it as individuals. Okay, however, there are certain rights which are enforceable against individuals or privates also. Why? Because say for example, abolition of untouchability, article 17. Okay, now untouchability essentially came from individuals only, right? So if even if the government banned it and individual are not it is not enforced against individual, what's going to happen? Are we going to end untouchability? No, we will not be able to, right? It has to end from the individuals only. So that is why they are enforced against citizens, against individuals also. Similarly, we have right against exploitation, freedom of movement. These are few examples which are enforceable against individual. However, majority of them are enforceable only against state. Then you have justiciable. That means fundamental rights are guaranteed and protected by the judiciary. Okay, as we discussed that in case of violation of fundamental rights, we can move to the court, Supreme Court. That is why they are guaranteed and protected by judiciary. That is, they are justiciable. Fourth is, they are negative obligation or limitation on the states. Why are we saying that? They are negative obligation. or they are limitation on state. Why are we saying that? See, fundamental rights are limitation because they are curtailing the authority of the state. Okay, what does that mean? That means it says state shall not discriminate. State shall do that. Either it is ordering state to do something or ordering state not to do something. So it is taking away their unlimited powers and putting restrictions on them. That is why they are acting as a limitation. Okay, and that is why it is a negative obligation on them. So these are the few features of fundamental rights. Next, we'll discuss about Article 12 and Article 13, which will also cover judicial review and the amendment to the fundamental rights. We'll discuss that tomorrow. Till then, please read it. And if you have any questions, any doubt, please ask in the comment section below. Thank you and have a nice day.